Hi, welcome to Lies and Secrets channel. We hope you will have fun with us. Enjoy watching. The sun was setting, casting long dancing shadows across our living room when Jackson walked in unexpectedly. My heart leapt into my throat as I sat there on the velvet couch, Alfie head on my lap, his trusting eyes looking up at me. The door creaked, a familiar sound that now felt like a warning. Jackson's silhouette filled the doorway, his expression shifting from confusion to something much darker as he took in the scene before him. My cheeks burned, not from the fading sunlight but from the shame that now engulfed me. Jackson, I whispered, my voice trembling. Don't know what came over me, but how could I explain the loneliness, the desperate need for connection that had driven me to this moment? The silence between us was thick, suffocating, and I knew this was just the beginning of a storm that would test the very fabric of our marriage. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Keep watching to find out how this unravels. The room was bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun, casting long shadows that danced across the walls like secrets whispered in the dark. I was sitting on the edge of our plush velvet couch, the kind that swallows you whole. When you sit down with our bulldog Alfie, his head resting on my lap. His eyes, always so trusting, looked up at me with an innocence that made my heart ache. I could feel the weight of my actions pressing down on me each moment, replaying in my mind like a film. I couldn't stop watching. Jackson, my husband, had walked in unexpectedly. The door had creaked, a sound so familiar, yet in that moment so jarring. He stood there, his silhouette framed by the doorway, a look of confusion, quickly morphing into something darker, more pained. I had been alone with Alfie, indulging in acts that now felt like a betrayal, not just of Jackson but of everything we stood for. My cheeks burned with shame, the kind that doesn't just color your face but seeps into your soul. Jackson, I started, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what came over me. My words felt inadequate, hollow against the gravity of what he had seen. He didn't move, didn't speak. The silence was thick, suffocating. I could see the questions forming in his eyes, the hurt, the betrayal. But there was something else too, a flicker of something I couldn't quite place. Was it anger, disbelief, or perhaps a hint of curiosity about what had driven me to this point? Alfie, sensing the tension, whimpered softly, his tail thumping weakly against the couch. I stroked his fur, trying to calm him or perhaps myself. I need to understand. Freya, Jackson finally said, his voice steady but strained. What were you doing? Why? Question hung between us, heavy with implications. I knew I had to answer, but how could I explain the inexplicable? How could I convey the storm of emotions, the loneliness, the need for something, anything to fill the void that had been growing inside me? As I looked at Jackson, I realized this was just the beginning. The beginning of unraveling truths, of facing consequences, and perhaps of understanding the depths of our own desires and the fragile boundaries of our marriage. I took a deep breath, the air feeling heavy with the weight of my confession. Jackson, it's not what you think. I began, my voice trembling. I was just feeling so alone, so disconnected from everything from you. Jackson's eyes narrowed slightly, a storm brewing behind them, disconnected. Freya, we're married. How could you feel disconnected? I looked down at Alfie, his first soft under my fingers, a stark contrast to the turmoil inside me. It's not about us not being together. I tried to explain, my words stumbling over each other. It's about feeling invisible, like I'm just going through the motions of our life but not really living it. He stepped closer, the tension in the room palpable. So you thought that this would make you feel seen? His tone was sharp, cutting through the silence like a knife. I shook my head, tears welling up. No, Jackson, it's not like that. I didn't plan this, it just happened. I was overwhelmed. And Alfie, he was there, and I needed something, anything to feel something real. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in. As Jackson processed my words, he ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration. I knew all too well. Freya, this isn't just about feeling something. This is about boundaries, about respect, what you did. It's not just a lapse in judgment, it's a breach of trust. I could see the pain in his eyes, the confusion, and beneath it all, a flicker of something else. Was it fear of what this meant for us for our marriage? I know, Jackson, and I'm so sorry. I whispered the words, feeling inadequate. I didn't mean to hurt you. I was lost in my own head and I made a terrible mistake. He turned away, looking out the window where the sun had now dipped below the horizon, leaving the room in twilight. We need to figure this out. Freya, this isn't just going to go away with an apology. The silence that followed was filled with the unspoken questions about our future, about trust, about the very foundation of our relationship. I could feel the beginning of a shift, the start of a journey neither of us had anticipated. As Jackson stood there, his back to me, I knew that this moment was just the tip of the iceberg. We were at the precipice of something much larger, a storm that would test the strength of our bond, our love, and our commitment to each other. Jackson's shoulders rose and fell with a heavy sigh, the tension in his posture speaking volumes. He turned back to face me, his expression a mix of resolve and pain. I need some time, Freya, time to think, to process this. I nodded, understanding the gravity of his request. I'll give you all the time you need. I said, my voice barely above a whisper, the guilt gnawing at me. He walked out, leaving the door slightly ajar, the sound of his footsteps fading down the hallway. The room felt colder, emptier without him. Alfie, sensing the shift, nuzzled closer to me, his warmth of small comfort in the vast emptiness that now seemed to engulf our home. The days that followed were a blur of silence and solitude. Jackson had moved to the guest room, a physical manifestation of the emotional distance growing between us. I tried to busy myself with work, with chores, but every moment was punctuated by the heavy silence, the unspoken questions hanging in the air like thick fog. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and my heart skipped a beat, hoping it might be Jackson ready to talk. Instead, it was Sarah, Jackson's sister, her face etched with concern. Freya. I heard about, well, everything, she said, stepping inside. Her eyes scanned the room, perhaps looking for signs of Jackson or the state of our relationship. I just wanted to check on you, on both of you. I managed a weak smile, appreciating her concern but dreading the conversation. He's not here right now, he's been staying in the guest room. Sarah's expression softened. I can imagine this is hard for both of you. Have you talked more about it? Not really. I admit, feeling the sting of tears. He needs time and I'm giving it to him. But it's like we're living in the same house as strangers. She sat down at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea I had poured for her. Freya, Jackson loves you, you know that. But it's a lot. Maybe you need someone to talk to, someone outside of this. Her suggestion of therapy or counseling was not new, but coming from her, it felt like a lifeline. Maybe I murmured the idea, both daunting and necessary. The next day I found myself sitting in a therapist's office, the room filled with the soft hum of an air conditioner and the scent of lavender. Dr. Ellis, a woman with kind eyes and a calm demeanor, listened as I recounted the events, my feelings of isolation, and the incident with Alfie. Sounds like you've been carrying a lot of emotional weight, Freya, Dr. Ellis said. After a moment of reflection, and sometimes when we feel unseen or unheard, we might act out in ways that are out of character, seeking some form of validation or connection. Her words resonated, striking a chord deep within. But how do I fix this? How do I make Jackson understand? Understanding might come from both of you. She replied, it's about rebuilding trust, communicating your needs, and perhaps understanding his perspective too. This isn't just about what happened. It's about why it happened. The sessions continued, each one peeling back layers of my own psyche, revealing not just my loneliness but also my fears, my desires for connection, and the complexities of our marriage. Meanwhile, Jackson and I started to have small, tentative conversations, often awkward, filled with pauses and unsaid words. One evening, as we sat in the living room, the distance between us palpable, Jackson finally spoke, his voice low. I've been talking to someone too, he confessed. I needed to understand my feelings, why I felt so betrayed, and how we could possibly move forward. The admission brought a mix of relief and anxiety. "I'm glad," I said, reaching out to touch his hand, a gesture that felt both foreign and familiar. "I want to understand too. Jackson. I want to make this right." The journey was far from over, the path ahead uncertain, but for the first time since that evening there was a glimmer of hope. We were both reaching out not just to each other but within ourselves, trying to mend what had been broken, to find a way back to each other or perhaps to something new. The atmosphere in our home had shifted subtly over the weeks. Jackson and I, though still living under the same roof, were like the planets orbiting around a shared sun, close yet worlds apart. The therapy sessions had become a sanctuary for me, a place where I could dissect my feelings, my actions without the immediate judgment of Jackson's pained eyes. One evening, after another session with Dr. Ellis, I returned home to find Jackson in the kitchen, his back to me as he stirred something on the stove. The scent of garlic and herbs filled the air, a comforting aroma that felt like a stark contrast to the tension that had become our norm. "Smells good," I said, my voice tentative. As I entered the room, he turned a small forced smile on his L*****. "I thought maybe we could have dinner together tonight like we used to." The invitation was simple, yet it felt monumental. I nodded, my heart racing with a mix of hope and apprehension. "I'd like that." We sat across from each other at the dining table, the silence between us filled with the clicking of cutlery and the occasional sip of wine. It was Jackson who broke the quiet, his voice low, almost hesitant. "I've been thinking a lot, Freya. About us, about what happened." I set my fork down, my appetite suddenly gone, and he took a deep breath, his eyes meeting mine with a seriousness that made my stomach churn. "I've been talking to my therapist about boundaries, trust, and what it means to truly connect with someone. It's not just about the physical act, Freya, it's about the emotional betrayal." I swallowed hard, the weight of his words pressing down on me. "I know, Jackson, I've been trying to understand that too. It's not just about me feeling alone. It's about how I handled that loneliness." He nodded, his gaze dropping to his plate. "I've realized something, Freya. I've been so caught up in my own world, my work, that I didn't see sping away. Maybe in a way, I was as disconnected as you felt. The admission was like a balm to my frayed nerves. Jackson, I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I was looking for something, anything, to make me feel alive, to feel sane." He reached across the table, his hand hesitating before covering mine. Touch was electric, a reminder of what we once had. "I want to see you, Freya, really see you, but I need to know if you're willing to work on this with me, not just for us, but for yourself too." Tears welled up in my eyes, not just from sadness, but from a burgeoning sense of hope. "I am Jackson. I want to rebuild what we've lost, to find our way back to each other." Conversation stretched into the night, each of us laying bare our fears, our desires, and our commitments. It was raw, painful, but also cathartic. We talked about setting new boundaries, about communication, about the need for both of us to be present in our marriage. As the evening drew to a close, Jackson stood his chair, scraping softly against the floor. I think I'm ready to move back into our room, Freya, if you're okay with that." The offer was a step forward, a bridge over the chasm that had formed between us. "I'd like that," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. That night, as we lay in bed, not touching but close enough to feel each other's warmth, I realized the journey ahead was daunting. Trust was fragile, the wound still fresh, but there was a willingness to heal, to try. The silence was no longer filled with accusations or guilt, but with the quiet promise of reconciliation. In the darkness, Jackson's voice came softly. "We're going to make it, Freya, we have to." I turned to face him, the moonlight casting shadows across his face. "Yes, we will," I whispered back, the resolve in my voice mirroring his. Path to recovery was uncertain, fraught with potential pitfalls. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like we were walking it together, not as adversaries but as partners committed to finding their way back to love, or perhaps to a new form of it. The storm was still brewing outside, but inside there was a flicker of light, a sign that maybe we could weather the storm together. The weeks that followed were a testament to our commitment. Therapy sessions continued not just for me but for Jackson too. We learned to speak a new language of love, one that involved not just words but the silent understanding of each other's pain and the slow, deliberate rebuilding of trust. One Sunday, as the autumn leaves began to paint the world in hues of gold and crimson, Jackson suggested a walk in the park. It was a simple request, but it felt monumental. We walked side by side, the crunch of leaves underfoot, the air crisp with the promise of change. "I've been thinking." Jackson started, his voice steady, "about what you said about feeling invisible. I've realized how much I took for granted, how much I expected you to just be there." I glanced at him, the sincerity in his eyes warming me more than the sun peeking through the trees, and I've been thinking about how I could have communicated better, how I could have reached out. Before things got to where they did, we stopped by a bench, the wood cool under our touch as we sat down. Jackson took my hand, his thumb tracing circles on my skin, a gesture that once was automatic but now felt deliberate, meaningful. "I want to make a promise. Freya," he said, his voice firm. "I promise to see you, to really see you every day, to listen not just to what you say but to what you don't." Tears pricked at my eyes, not of sorrow but of a profound relief, and I promise to be more open to share when I'm feeling lost or alone. "We're in this together, Jackson," he nodded, pulling me closer, the space between us diminishing together. He echoed, his breath warm against my cheek as we walked back home. Hand in hand, the world seemed to shift, the colors were brighter, the air sweeter. It wasn't just the promise of autumn. It was the promise of us, of a new beginning forged from the ashes of our past mistakes. That night, as we prepared for bed, there was a lightness in the room, a sense of anticipation, rather than dread. Jackson paused by the door, looking back at me with a smile that reached his eyes, something I hadn't seen in what felt like forever. "I love you, Freya." He said the words, simple yet loaded with the weight of our journey. "I love you too, Jackson," I replied, my heart full, the words a balm to the wounds we were healing. We lay down closer, this time our bodies finding a familiar comfort in each other's presence. The silence was different, now filled not with the echoes of past betrayals, but with the quiet strength of our renewed vows to each other. In the quiet of our room, with the soft sounds of the night outside, I felt a peace settle over me. Path ahead was still uncertain, but we were no longer walking it alone. We were together, truly, together in a way that felt both new and profoundly familiar. The storm had passed, and in its wake there was not just hope but a tangible sense of renewal, of love being given another chance to grow, to thrive. As I drifted to sleep, Jackson's arm around me, I knew that whatever came next, we would face it as a united front, our bond not just repaired but strengthened by the trials we had endured. The CLA Alfie of our story wasn't just about the fall. It was about the rise, the resurgence of love, and the enduring promise of tomorrow. As the seasons changed, so did the dynamics of our relationship. ********************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************* But within our home, a warmth was slowly being rebuilt. Jackson and I had made significant strides not just in our therapy sessions but in our daily interactions. One cold December evening, as snow began to gently fall outside, we sat by the fireplace, the flames casting a warm glow over us. Jackson had his arm around me, and for the first time in a long while it felt like we were truly together, not just physically but emotionally. "I've been thinking about something," Jackson said, his voice thoughtful as he watched the snowflakes dance outside our window. "I think we should plan a trip, just the of us, somewhere new, somewhere we can start fresh memories." The idea sparked a flicker of excitement in me, a break from the routine that had become our life. "Where are you thinking?" He smiled, his eyes reflecting the firefight. "How about a cabin in the mountains, just us, nature, and maybe a bit of solitude to reconnect?" The suggestion was perfect, a chance to step away from the world, from the lingering shadows of our past mistakes. "I'd love that," I replied, feeling a genuine smile spread across my face. Planning the trip became a project of hope, a symbol of our commitment to rebuild. We chose a secluded cabin in the Rockies, known for its breathtaking views and serene isolation. Thank you for watching. If you like this story, please subscribe to our channel to receive more stories every day. Share with us what you think of this.